Hey, Stephanie. You're the first person on my screen. That's why I'm saying hi to you and nobody else. You're the one who's big on my screen. How is everybody? Did you have a long, good, relaxing weekend? Ashley, Cameron, hi. You two have now graced my screen as well. I hope you're all well. Lecture. Cameron, I see you flipping through a notebook. Are you getting ready for some notes? Okay. Yeah, some of this is going to be review material for people who have had me before. For people who haven't had me before, it might sound like I'm talking fast and plowing through information, but it's one of the staples that I commonly discuss. So some people it is going to be more familiar material, and others will feel very novel. Let me open up the chat box. All right. So unmute and let me know if you have questions along the way, and or put it in the chat box, and I'll have my eye on that. So just to begin with the checklist, let's look over our shoulder for a second and come up with a checklist of stuff that I want people to remember so far, little points along the way. You know, if you do your drive from Canada to Mexico, there's some major cities along the way. You know, you're going to get to Seattle and Tacoma and Portland and Eugene, and let's throw in Weed. And there's some major areas along the way. Through these lectures, I'll say a lot of stuff, but not everything I say is a metropolitan area. Not everything I say is a destination that requires any recollection. So some of those, I'm just assigning importance to things we've already talked about. Tardigrades, you just know what they are for the sake of this is stress physiology. This is our bodies are encountering every minute of your life. You're asleep, you're awake, you're indoors, you're outdoors, you're now in life, you're later in life. At all moments, your body is under stress. Your brain and your tissues and all of your cells and let's say your soul is under stress. And how we respond to that stress is what this class is about. Now, if you're a tardigrade, there's no response because nothing kills you, nothing threatens you. Really, there's no such thing as stress if you're a tardigrade. I mean, you can kill them, but good luck. It's really hard. So that's the premise, is that we're closer to this guy. I don't think anybody is this happy or false in life, but I think maybe we behave like this and adopt this Eeyore type of sadness, but this is the physiology we're stuck with. So this idea of what stress is, it's things that make us depart homeostasis. It's conditions, environments, self-imposed or external, could be internal, anything from a work situation to an altitude, stuff that is going to disturb or disrupt our homeostasis. And so back to the idea of fitness, just always keep this premise of fitness in mind, where we have to be compatible with our environment. And there's a lot of environments. It's not just Earth environment. We're compatible with Earth living in 2021. That's not what fitness necessarily means. The obvious example is, are you a sumo wrestler or a cyclist? Very different demands. A ballerina or ballerino, right? Very different demands. So in general, health fitness is going to be a matter of do minor changes in an environmental context, do small disturbances in your daily routine pose great threats? you're not fit then. You have to be sort of robust and be able to tolerate. I'm just holding back a sneeze the entire time I'm talking. You have to be able to uh, be I don't compatible or suitable within your environment. But there are contextual examples of fitness, which is like altitude. If you live in Tibet, you better be well adapted to that compared to living in Stockton, which is just digging a pit down, below sea level. Thermal regulation sort of depends, right? We have the built environment. We live indoors and have climate control. But if you are in Saudi Arabia, let's say, and you have to do something outdoors, it can be punishing. Um, to be adapted to that. Or if you're an athlete and you're playing in hot conditions, you're an athlete in Texas, like you're in San Antonio, and you are an athlete, you better be adapted for thermal regulation. Maybe it's military stress or occupational stress, some extreme or you're like out in outer space and you're there by yourself or with one other person, or you're at the International Space Station with 5 other people or something, and that's serious quarantine, much more serious than any of us are doing. We don't really have an opportunity to just, well, let me put on my mask and go risk it if you're out in outer space. So but like military stress, if so you have someone shouting at you or shooting bullets at you or something, there's an emotional constitution. There's a contextual fitness there. Contact adaptation, that's another contextual fitness. Maybe you're at risk of cardiovascular disease, maybe you're at risk of diabetes, maybe you're at risk of, probably not osteoporosis, but maybe you're at risk of a lot of these things. You're George Foreman or something. But contact adaptation, you can take a punch, right? That there are actual sort of in the matrix changes that happen for contact adaptation. Or if you're a football player, you get speared a bunch and hit a bunch, and you adapt to be able to tolerate those stresses much better. That's a contextual example of fitness in a particular environment, a sort of a microcosm of a larger environment. How tan is your skin, right? So there's a lineage, there's a sort of a descendant adaptation. Depends on where your ancestors, what climate they grew up in, but also if just any one of us moves somewhere hotter or colder, more sun, or not necessarily just hot or cold, but the amount of sunlight, we're going to adapt. We're going to become fit, or hopefully we're not going to be too unfit to that environment. If I were to go to like United Arab Emirates or something, I've been a couple of times, and I am not somebody who is well adapted to that. I don't do well in heat, and the sun, I don't tan. I just burn, and then like I peel, and then I'm just as white when after. And the layers underneath, I was like, why is there nothing tan underneath those layers that just peeled off like it was Elmer's glue in elementary school? And so the skin tones are an adaptation to become more fit to a climate, more fit to a environmental environment. Think about like if you have a career online, or in some public forum, you got to have thick emotional skin because everybody hates you for no reason. Imagine if you're a musician. Whoever your favorite musicians are, go Google them and look up negative criticism, and people like, you're dead to me is what people say to musicians right now. Whoever your favorite musician is, if it's somebody who's not like a indie underground kind of performer, oh, my sister or whatever, if it's an actual performer who has like has a career and stuff, before I finish this sentence, somebody online will type the words, you're dead to me, to that person. Like, well, I'm a human being, these musicians must be thinking, or these actors and actresses must be thinking, or these, I don't know, like internet moguls, this like YouTube folks must be thinking as they get this horrible like criticism all the time. Thick emotional skin, that's fitness to a context. Can you not handle that sort of stress? Okay, well, you're not fit to that environment. Thick physical skin, right? Are you? I don't know. Do you play a stringed instrument? you better have the right calluses or whatever appropriate calluses for whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe it's physique contextual fitness. Maybe you need a huge upper body and tiny legs. You're a competitive bench presser or something, and it's a weight class issue, and you don't want your legs weighing you down. Um, or you need huge legs and a tiny upper body. You're a cyclist, something like that. These are contextual examples of fitness. So fitness is not a simple word. Fitness is not, oh, good abs or whatever. That's not what fitness means. And usually we get into some pretty deep physiology, things like mTOR signaling for how fitness emerges, metabolic sort of equilibrium in our environment. Are we are we atrophying too much or or appropriately? Is it too much hypertrophy? Is that appropriate or inappropriate? So the foundation of fitness is commonly metabolism and cell signaling of how it manifests, the mechanism of how fitness arises and how we defend and build and lose. Fitness is commonly a metabolic function, but it's actually a complicated term, and we could spend our entire semester just talking about fitness, disruptions to metabolism, and how it becomes incompatible with life stresses, stuff like that. So magazine covers sort of mess up our understanding of what fitness is. Now, this concept of toleration, habituation, sensitization, accommodation, adaptation, genetic adaptation. Adaptation is acute. That's the individual. But it also matters when we're looking at evolution or genetic adaptation, adaptation at the level of a lineage, of a species. So there are millions of species of spiders that are giving everybody the creeps. There's just growing up, we all have these, who knows if they're true, old siblings tales, right? Where it's, oh, you're never farther away from a spider than 3 feet is one that I heard growing up. And who knows? I don't know if that's true. You eat 8 spiders in the course of your life. They just climb into your mouth as you sleep with your mouth open. All of these things that are meant to scare children, and maybe they're true, maybe they don't even matter if they're. But spiders, a lot of these things give us the creeps. But the idea is the world is filled with habitats. The world is filled with climates, and spiders adapt to those climates. Some climates exterminate spiders, and those spiders that are left as survivors in those environments breed. And so they create a new species of spider. So if general adaptation syndrome were a true thing, we would start to enter that realm of general evolution syndrome, and then we would have one species of spider today. And the diversity would be unfascinating and unthreatening, probably. But when you can look at this, at evolution of spiders, a genetic adaptation of spiders, and the temperature, different environments have different temperatures. Just go to I don't know, Idaho or wherever the closest cold place is to either cold places in California. Go to Tahoe during the winter, and the spiders are going to be different from the Death Valley spiders. They will have different proteins, they will have different physiological characteristics. People have been studying this for a very long time, right? 1979 there. So there's a bunch of factors, proteins that get translated. There's glycerol. These spiders will create their own antifreeze in really cold environments. Do all spiders do that? No. Only the spiders who need to be uh, frost tolerant, ice cold temperature tolerant, only those spiders. Other spiders are tolerant to very high temperatures. These are not the same spiders, right? These are the critical thermal limits for cold temperature for spiders, and there's a bunch of different critical temperatures depending on the species of spider. And they're not looking at like, all right, let's go up to Tibet and let's go to the Death Valley, and they're not circling the globe looking for extremes. They're just taking this small collection right here. So then the high temperature spiders. And it's a nice article. It's from 2020. It's a recent article. The first line: temperature is known to influence many aspects of organisms, and it is frequently linked to geographical species distributions. So if you remember that idea of environment, as we talked about music, environment comes first species comes second. The fitness comes second. Environment first, species second. Now this is Hans Selye, and remember his experiments. So know Hans Selye's name. His experiments were on a bunch of rats and general adaptation syndrome, or GAS, general adaptation syndrome. That part of what he said was inaccurate, right? That was false. But general alarm reaction, if that's what's coming out of his mouth, that's true. We respond to the presence of a spider in our mouth the same way acutely in that first 10 seconds that we're going to respond with a dog barking at us, or some sort of a phone call with really bad threatening news, or a bullet coming through the wall, or a hard sprint. We're going to respond very similarly. General alarm reaction, very similar response to general adaptation syndrome. That part isn't true. And this I've just decided to have like winter's leaves pouring out of his mouth. But how do we respond when life is favorable to us, when life introduces no threats and no stresses? It's Wally, right? It's this is a life devoid of stress. We are emotionally I don't know if we're entertained or distracted, whatever, but let's not allow anything to from what we're looking at into our perception, our balls of perception, our eye orbs, right? Let's not let anything stress us out. Let's be in a comfortable posture, um, unless you have a GERD, right? Esophageal, reflux, but that's maybe not a good posture for it. But if you let's have um, the minimum amount of stress. We have sustenance, we have nothing visually or physically threatening us. That is, it's a stress of a kind, it's a threat of a kind, it's stressing out our tissues. I'm looking at the comment box. Can we be genetically adapted to the point where we won't be affected by some diseases? Yes. I don't think we're there, but that idea of herd immunity, of depending on what the disease is. Let's say, let's look at metabolic syndrome right now, of we have this, we're devoid of physical exertion, physical stress, caloric depletion, use of what we're chewing on, and we have an excess of calories coming in. The consequences of that is um, hyperlipidemia. We're seeing cholesterol problems. It is pre-diabetes and diabetes, and we're getting glucose problems. We're seeing abdominal adiposity, and now some of that we're going to look at this at emotional stresses and the consequences of those later in the semester. Cortisol, side effects of persistent cortisol release. You're gonna, here comes the gut. There are consequences of cortisol, but um, if we just say, all right, everybody stop exercising and just eat as much as you want, there's still going to be some people who don't get diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline and whatever other common ailments have strong correlations with that type of behavior. And then those people breed, right? And then we end up with a species that can tolerate this lifestyle. Right now we're not there, but that's, let's be very unsympathetic here. On the subject of spiders, right? They give birth to their kids and then eat some of them because they worked up an appetite, spitting them out. Um, Diabetes and cardiovascular disease and stuff are purging people who are unfit. That's the most direct, least sensitive way I can put that. And so we are in a period of adaptation to changing climates, changing stresses, changing environments. We're becoming fit to a different profile. But let's say that happens for 50 years, and then we revert back to some other set of stresses, some other set of stresses where we're like hunting again, some post-apocalyptic world, and everybody there's like zombies or something, and we have to go get our own meat, our zombie meat, and cook it. Now we're unfit for that world. So over time we'll adapt. Think about, there's an age where women start to get a little bit panicky about, if they don't have kids and they're reaching a certain age, and like, okay, at this age, the risk of Down syndrome is increasing in my offspring, and there's going to be an age where I can no longer have children, and that age is different from family to family, right? From woman to woman, that age is different. But if there was a law that said nobody under the age of 40 is allowed to have kids, we will under penalty of death, we would change, right? And so the type of person capable of having a healthy offspring over the age of 40, that's the only lineage that's going to go on living, and then delay it to 50, and then say, okay, we're going to kill anybody who gets pregnant under the age of 50, right? Okay, the only people having kids are going to be 50 and up, right? So we're going to have this genetic profile that is equipped to produce offspring very late in life. And so it's the stresses. Now that's ridiculous, unethical. There's no way anybody with like a moral mind would want to enforce that or think that's a good idea, or somehow not see the dire failure in ethics. So don't think Courtney says we should kill people who are under the age of 50 and pregnant. Obviously that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you change, like, think about, let's say anyone under the age under the height of 6'6" is going to be eliminated from the gene pool. Okay, we're down to like Nathaniel in class, and I don't know, maybe so, but suddenly it's not exclusive. The height, like, everybody's 7 feet tall at some point, because that is a selective pressure for survival of the species. So right now, selective pressures for the survival of our species are, can you do whatever you want and not get diabetes? And so over time we're seeing the effects on our genomes. But a life without stress is this life of decay, whether it's emotional stress, academic stress, physical stress. If you're Wally, humans, not if you're the robot, if you're the people, and you're just like, you know what, I do not want to be threatened in any way. I do not want to be criticized in any way. I do not want to be corrected in any way. I do not want to be uncomfortable in any moment. You're a Wally person, right? Your mind decays, your coping skills decay, everything decays. Safe space is the worst possible thing. Okay, immediate like execution is the worst possible thing. Um, if you're like, the Bolsheviks gunning down the Romanovs, okay, that's worse than a safe space. I would opt for a safe space in that situation. But if we're going to go on living and trying to be healthy, worst thing you can do to yourself is a safe space. And so just remember this premise. You don't need to remember anything about music itself, right? You don't need to remember anything about like the cathedral, like Mozart in the late 1700s with the deadening of sound and the frills. You don't need to know that, or the early 1700s. We have Bach and contemporaries, and the Gothic cathedrals, and I don't know, neo Baroque with like Styx and Journey and Foreigner and all those bands that I find so silly that people do at karaoke. You don't need to remember anything about music itself, but remember the premise. It was a brilliant premise. David Byrne, if he came up with it, I've never seen somebody say it so articulately. He's not a physiologist; he was a musician himself, Talking Heads. But the premise: environment first, species second. And there's a lot of research on animals: environment first, species second. Whether it's spiders, it's birds, it's people, any type of animal, the environment comes first. The set of stressors, the breadth and depth of stressors, how punishing is the heat, how high is the altitude, that comes first. And then the type of life that can endure that endures it. The type of life that cannot endure that is purged from the reproductive pool. And so then we end up with evolution and genetic adaptation or evolution. And just remember that every environment is unique. That's what this guy, you don't need to know his name, just the premise. Just the premise. Every environment is unique. There are no two environments that are the same here. And in that same sort of as the next logical step from that, there are no two adaptations that are the same. We have specificity of adaptation. There is not general adaptation syndrome. Over here, we have Julius Wolff, this guy, know that name. That's the first name you should know. Cellier, no Cellier. And then Julius Wolff, 1892, he publishes his book on bone remodeling and so the architecture of bones. And in it, he talked about specificity of adaptation from the perspective of bones. What are those bones doing? Are you twisting them? Are you compressing them? Are you pulling on them? Is it impact on the bones? What is it that you're doing to the bones? They will respond accordingly, and they will respond specifically accordingly. They're not just going to adapt comprehensively to no matter what you do. Oh, there's a little bit of impact on the shin. Okay, let's reinforce the entire bone everywhere for every possible load profile. That doesn't happen. That's metabolically inefficient. That's terrible. You're not going to do that. You're going to reinforce the bone specifically according to the nature of the stress. And then this is Davis over here, Henry Davis. It's actually Mario because I don't have a picture of Davis. But he came along sooner. So that's 1867. So 1892 over here we have 1867, but it was so limited what he was saying. He was like, ligaments, stretch them and they get stretchy. You know, it wasn't that complicated what he was saying, but it was specificity of adaptation really at its foundation. So here we have Julius Wolff, right? The law of bone remodeling and just the architecture of bone. So Wolff's law. Wolff's law is this foundational law that people apply to everything and the bones, right? The bones and everything else. Specificity of adaptation. He just talked about bones, but it applies to everything. And we've been talking about this at length for quite a while. So there's a 2003 update on bone physiology and Wolff's law for clinicians, and so making some of these antiquated uh, papers and concepts a little bit more contemporary and precise in their applications. You don't need to know too much about that. Just know Wolff's law. Bones adapt very specifically to the load profiles placed on it. What is a load profile? A class of stress. The stress is a load profile, and the nature of that stress, the characteristics of that load profile determine the bone remodeling to very specifically tolerate future bouts of that same set of loads. Rate of application, where it is, the amount of torsion, how much, whatever it is, the characteristics of it. Now, Henry Gassett Davis, the picture that I have behind, he's now Luigi. He's just toggling through Mario characters. Henry Gassaway Davis was like a politician in a similar age. I could find a picture of him. I just couldn't find a picture of Henry Gassett Davis. But 1867, right? We're 25 years earlier. We're publishing conservative surgery. He's this American surgeon, and he again was talking about ligaments, quote, or any other soft tissue. So go do your yoga or whatever and stretch out a little bit. Do your calisthenics with a little. Be limber, and at the end of your limber protocol, you're going to adapt. You're going to become more limber, and there's a lot to it. It's not just the elastic components in within the tissue. Some part of the flexibility adaptation is actually neural, and you know this intuitively because every time you get a flu or some sort of illness where you feel it down to your bones, you feel it down to your Wolff's tissues, uh, you can't even touch your knees, right? Okay, so you might be able to palm the floor or something. Oh, I did cheerleading or ballet, or I was a ice skater or something. I'm super flexible. Yeah, but get the flu, and how flexible are you now? Did your tissue change? Did the architecture of your tissue change? Did you degrade a bunch of proteins and replace them with weird ones? Did you go through a ton of sarcomere Did you know, are the architectural characteristics of your tissue any different? No, but you're not flexible anymore. You'll be flexible when that illness goes away. So some of this is a neural permission, but going back to 1867, we have this corollary of Wolff's law, this cousin, this prop of in parallel to Wolff's law, which is Davis's law, which just means stretch and your stuff gets flexible. So later in Hans Selye's career, because this is in the late 19th century, we're seeing specificity of adaptation, and then you fast forward into the 30s and the 40s, and it's just general adaptation. It's just saying the opposite, essentially, um, saying it differently, but saying what is effectively the opposite of 19th century understanding of specificity of adaptation. Later in Selye's career, right, 1950, there's a little bit of room for specificity where, okay, at first everything is sort of the same, but over time there can be some specific things. So think, insulin does have an effect. You're going to insulin sensitivity issues. If you just dose someone with insulin, you're going to insulin sensitivity problems. But that's not the same thing as like alcohol, quote, tolerance, right? Or drink I don't know, a bottle of brandy every day, and you're still a newbie with uh, weed and crack, right? It's not like you build up tolerance to every drug because you had a mug full of rum in the morning, right? So the specificity of adaptation, he sort of hints at that phenomenon. He gets to it in the 1950s, but he still keeps this sort of premise down here of again 1950s writing in regards defense hitherto mentally and whatever, but he still thinks the medicine should keep its focus on general adaptation syndrome. A study of the general adaptation syndrome suggests we should so this idea of, although there's specificity, yeah, okay, I admit that there's a little bit of chronic specificity here, but we should still try to focus on the general adaptation syndrome. 1955, same thing. It's, resistance from one drug is not the same as the next. Tolerance to one stress is not necessarily chronically tolerance to the next. And so as he goes to the 1950s, he just sort of gives specificity a pass, kind of a wide berth, like, okay, I'm going to let you pass me, but I'm going to keep talking about my fundamental premise of general adaptation syndrome. But again, 1892, 1867 over here for Davis and Wolff. This is closer to the truth over here. Is it a crude understanding of what was happening? Yeah, it was the 19th century. This is like, it was remarkable when germ theory was like, what, invisible monsters are causing my illness? Ha 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 ha. Yeah, it is. That is what it is, right? It's just like, um, and so our understanding of human physiology and biology and medicine in the 19th century wasn't all that advanced or impressive, but this is pretty impressive given that it's this sort of rudimentary, this first steps into specificity of adaptation. Hans Selye had a lot more information available to him, and he sort of missed the mark a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean that there is an overlap. Specificity of adaptation does not eliminate overlap in our response to stressors. And this is Edward Adolph, and probably my favorite researcher of adaptation, of specificity of adaptation. He did his undergrad through his PhD at Harvard and did a lot of research on this field, really advanced our understanding of specificity of adaptation, not just bones and ligaments and other soft tissues, but let's take the human form in a number of contexts and look at a number of tissues and really take a hard look at the breadth of this phenomenon. That's what he was doing. And in the 1950s is when he was doing his work, sort of when when Selye was making a little bit of room for specificity of adaptation was during the work of um, of Edward Adolph. And he has a great background, and when he writes up these articles, this really great background where he talks about didn't really begin. He does the historical perspective. Okay, where are the first uh, sort of microbes of this understanding of specificity of adaptation? And he begins in the 1670s in his sort of a look over biology's shoulder and the dissection of specificity of adaptation. Um, Boyle assuefaction was the coinage of adaptation, and so looking at the 17th century, there was some commentary, there was some work on it, and then he kind of goes through the ages of here we are today, and he describes some elements of adaptation as sort of complete, which is far from the truth. There's really nothing that's complete, and even in domains like, in say muscle physiology, whether it's specificity of adaptation or it's Henneman's size principle, all of these fundamental tenets of muscle physiology, none of them are complete. There's still work coming out. So in the 1950s, it's a little bit ambitious to say this particular domain is complete in its understanding. That aside, man, this guy was good. Wonderful writing, wonderful experiments, really insightful, and he advanced our understanding of specificity of adaptation, probably more than anybody, in my estimation, more than anybody. I mean, a lot of arguments could be made, but when you look at some of this stuff, this is in that, it's a 1956 publication. I think it was submitted in 54 or something, but it has been widely supposed, this is Edward Adolph writing, it has been widely supposed that adaptations to various stressors have much in common. He's talking about Selye. He didn't say Selye said, right? So you have to be there's etiquette in science. You don't just say, oh, this person's full of shit, let me tell you why. You can't say that, right? It has been widely supposed that adaptations to various stressors have much in common. I ask, how much? The conclusion will be reached that combinations of modifications differ markedly from one stressor to another. Specificity of adaptation, 1950s, starting to look pretty specifically at different exposures. Adaptates overlap. This is at the very end of the article. For instance, high altitude is not wholly separate from cold air. You're going to go up to cold air, up to high altitude, and it's going to be cold up there. Go for a hike somewhere high. It's going to be cold up there. And so we're going to see some overlapping adaptations. Has been neglected in the belief that the general syndrome predominates. Again, he's talking about Selye. But the tally of specific instances now shows that adaptates are not the same for several stressors. So 1950s, we're overturning Hans Selye. 1940s, right, go back a decade. We're 1945, the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. Thomas Delorme, he's a big name, but it appears he kind of looks like, I don't know, Jim Coach or something. But he was this World War II physician, and wounded servicemen needed tending. They needed healing. They're injured. We got to get them back on their feet, maybe back on their foot, right, if they lost one. And so he's looking at how do we restore these frames, these physiques and functions. How do we restore this? And weightlifting, that's an answer. Well, how do we weightlift? Specificity of adaptation, 1945, great article, right? Again, Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. I mean, this guy he's a physician, and he talked about specificity of adaptation in weightlifting, and it was brilliant for its simplicity. Let's introduce this. I mean, this is in the heyday of Selye, right? This is Hans Selye is living it up, and he's a hero, and he's making tons of money in the cigarette industry. But I mean, that's sort of like Hans Selye became this huge name with general adaptation syndrome, and then Over here, you got Thomas Delorme saying, all right, here's how you lift weights, specificity of adaptation, but it's quiet. That nobody really paid attention to that. So think specificity of adaptation. The example I always give, the analogy I always lean on, is just think military, right? If the U.S. goes to war, like there's some, Mexico because of the drugs, right? There's just the drug runners have gone crazy, and what are we supposed to do here? The whole United States is just stoned all the time, so we're going to go, and everyone's being killed for competing or whatever. uh okay, so we go to war with Mexico. There's, we have a navy, we have an army, we have marines, we have a bunch of tanks and planes and soldiers and guns and bullets. We have all this equipment and technology and vehicles and personnel. Okay. Or we go to war with North Korea because let's say they get, like, they get electricity figured out, and then they get a nuclear program developed, and it's suddenly threatening to, like, California or something. Okay, we have an army and a navy, and we have marines, we have tanks, and we have planes, and we have personnel, we have soldiers, we have guns and bullets, and we have bombs, and we have all the exact same equipment. We have the exact same people, both leading the charge. We have the same people charging. We have the same bullets, but we don't conduct the war in the same way. If it's general military strategy, and it's just you have a 1982 bazooka, and no matter what the war is, this is what you're wearing, and you got your walkie-talkie and your whatever bazookas. If you conduct war, that we're no longer, we no longer have an effective military. Same thing with adaptation. We have the same hormones, we have the same immune chemicals, interleukins and interferon, and we have, prostaglandins, and we have all these same cytokines, and we have the same tissues and glands, and we have all of the same stuff. But if we go to war with squats, that's you don't mobilize the troops in the exact same way. You mobilize the same troops. It's going to look the same on day one, but you don't do the same thing, right? You go to war on squats as opposed to you go to war on a stressful work structure. You don't mobilize troops in the same way. You have the same resources. An hour into it, maybe it looks similar, right? General alarm reaction. Chronically, that would be insane to do general military strategy, and it would be lethal to do general adaptation syndrome. Now, that doesn't mean that Hans Selye was a dunce. This guy was super smart, right? He had 3 doctorates and 30 books. There's a lot of, like, pamphlet-sized books. The Stress of Life, that was a super famous one. 17 Nobel nominations and 0 victories. So here's the list of, if you go here, you can look at the Nobel Prize. He had 17 nominations from these people, and 0 victories. Really smart, really prolific, really hardworking guy, but he sort of missed the mark on general adaptation syndrome. What we know is that no matter what the stress is, remember earlier today and last time, no 2, humps of sand are the same. No 2 stretches of desert, no 2, waves are the same. If you're going to go circle the globe, you're going to sort of go start Forrest Gump yourself across California or something, and there's no 2 stresses are really the same. A lot of them are similar. No 2 stresses are the same. There are unique qualities, unique characteristics to each. Every single workout has a unique fingerprint. Every single environmental stressor has a unique fingerprint. Every single emotional stressor has a unique fingerprint, and our adaptation responds very specifically to the nature of that print, of that fingerprint, of the precise characteristics. Now, if a cell or a tissue, a body were to inadequately adapt, adapt shy of its needs, be insufficient in its adaptation, that threatens survival, right? If You need a bigger VO2 max to escape predators, and your body's like, nah, no thanks. It's too much. I don't want all this enzymatic work and laying down a bunch of new roadway for my blood vessels. No thanks. Let's just see if we can make do with what we have. Well, then the predators are going to get you, right? So you have to adapt according to your needs, but to adapt beyond your needs, right? Sort of this copious adaptation of you go to the gym and you lift, the pink dumbbells, and then you get these giant biceps. That is comparably bad because you need to eat, right? You need to support your tissue with sustenance. Now, if you're like a normal person and then you go to the gym, you lift a few pink dumbbells, and 3 weeks later you look like this, acutely, that's super expensive. Protein translation, the assembling of proteins, protein accretion, let's hypertrophy our tissues. Super expensive, but that's not the only cost, right? That is not the only cost. That initial energy cost, let's say it's half of the body's half of a cell's metabolic expense is translation. Let's link together a bunch of amino acids and end up with a protein, deposit that protein, and get started on another one, and really expensive. But once you have larger tissue, once hypertrophy has taken place, you now need to maintain that tissue. Your basal metabolism is elevated. And throughout the history of our species, your mom's dad's grandpa's great grandma's great grandpa. You start going back generation after generation after generation, and what were the threats? What were the stresses? What were we fit to? Well, just like a generation ago, a couple of generations ago, what we have is a shortage of food, right? We have insufficient uh calories. We have quashy core protein deficiency diseases, and um we have nutrient scarcity is what threatens us. Now we have nutrient surpluses, but that's not what our genomes were assembled. Our genomes are being assembled and programmed in an environment that's remarkably different from how it is today. So if you go get big, if you go lift a pink dumbbell, you're like, oh, suddenly my basal metabolism is 400 calories higher a day. Just wow, it's been a month. This diet works, and this exercise prescription is amazing. Um, for three simple payments of $49.99. Look what happens. If that actually happens, right, and then suddenly nutrient scarcity strikes your genome, which it's been expecting it since you were born. Nutrient scarcity arrives, you're the first one to die, right? You have this metabolic need that is higher than everyone else's. Everyone else who is just like, okay, you know what, I'm being conservative in my metabolically hungry tissue accretion. And so this stress, so like if this guy carves out this little canoe out of a giant log, and at the end of carving he doesn't sort of look a tiny bit emaciated with a little bit of a gut, if he looks like the guy with the pink dumbbells after carving one boat, he now needs to catch additional fish to support it. So the only reason your body will adapt and the only conditions that will elicit adaptation is if your body, let's say it's this person, everyone, males and females, you're all cavemen now. Um, so if your body takes on kind of elaborate adaptations, you now need to catch more fish. You now need to catch additional elk or whatever. Your body frame, your new muscle tissue, your new physique has to permit you to catch even more food. Otherwise, you die. So that's the only reason it's going to adapt is if it thinks that adaptation is going to permit more calories than it costs. That adaptation, that new muscle or whatever, is going to result in the acquisition of even more calories than the expense of building that tissue and maintaining it. So if you think about it from the perspective of rent, let's say you're renting somewhere, it's $24.50 a month and it's this house. And then, but the roof is a little bit like not good. And so like, okay, the homeowner comes in and puts on a brand new roof and it's pretty and the gutters work and um, but the rent goes up to $3,100 a month. Maybe you can't afford that. Right? Maybe you can't afford that, so you become homeless, or you have to downsize somehow. In the body, if you become homeless, if you lose your body, that's death, right? So you're only going to upgrade if you know you can afford it. If you know you can afford it, that's the only reason you're going to upgrade. Otherwise, upgrades are threatening to our survival, and the body is going to do what it thinks, not what you think with your giant frontal lobes, what it thinks is optimal for self-preservation. Right? One of those major biological purposes of life, self preservation. The body is not going to adapt if it thinks that threatens preservation. It's only going to adapt if it thinks it enhances our ability to preserve ourselves at least long enough to see our genome propelled into a future generation. So life is frugal. Your cells are frugal. I mean, we are not spendthrifty muscles, and we are very conservative. We're going to be lazy, however we can, wherever we can, whenever we can. Laziness is what we're going to choose, and that is the same behavior your cells take on in response to you exercising. So how an organism, you are an organism, how any organism is going to respond to stress, if it's not lethal, right? You just tolerate it. Maybe you sweat a little bit, you accommodate, right? You sweat a little, okay, fine. Or it's just ouch, ouch, ouch. And then you drop the pinks, right? You drop those little dumbbells and then and you move on. If it's a significant load, if it matters, if the load is threatening to our tissues, but you experience it once and then you don't do it again. You mow your lawn once a year. Like, okay, you're not going to like remodel your tissues after one exercise bout. You might, on the second exercise bout, you might have neural permissions that didn't exist before. You might have better rate coding. You might have withdrawal of GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. You might have the Golgi tendon organ might be a little bit more permissive. You know, you might have these neuronal adaptations on workouts 2, 3, 4, 5, but you're not going to translate a bunch of proteins. You're not going to hypertrophy, anything like that. So you accommodate until the stress passes, and then maybe there's some neuronal adaptations. But if it's a pronounced stress, you know, if it's a little bit harder, a little bit heavier, threatens your tissues, right? If it's no threat at all, if it's like, well, I can do this and there's no harm done, there's no threat, I'm not gonna pull anything, you know, strain muscle or like probably myotendinous junction or sprain a ligament. I'm not going to have heat stroke. I'm not going to have some embolus roaring around in my vasculature. You know, none of this is threatening to me. Who cares then? It doesn't matter. There's no reason to adapt if it's not threatening you. But if it's frequently experienced and the load is sufficient, then you're going to adapt. But you're going to adapt very specifically. You know, Thomas Delorme stuff. If you're in the weight room, just because you're good at bench press doesn't make you good at push-ups. Just because you're good at push-ups doesn't make you good at bench press, right? There's very specific, maybe there's a little bit of overlap, right? Edward Adolph, maybe there's a little bit of overlap, but surprisingly little. If you're good at rope climbing, that doesn't make you good at rock climbing, right? Yeah, maybe there's a little bit of overlap. There's some biceps and leg stuff involved, or like my core strength or something. Sure, okay, whatever. But you're not enhancing your performance in one by training the other. Specificity of adaptation. Now, that's at the level of the individual. At the level of the species, getting into the level of the species, now that's like if the low hanging fruit only hangs low until it's eaten, and then it's not there anymore, and this giraffe can't reach it, right? This giraffe cannot reach that low hanging fruit, and so it dies. Right, just like what I said with the basketball example. If nobody under Nathaniel's height is permitted to survive, right, then everybody who breeds and breathes, right, is so self-preservation and reproduction. So everybody who breathes preservation and breeds reproduction is at least 6'6", Okay, we're going to have a really tall species, and that's what giraffes. And you can see these silly adaptations in what's called the recurrent laryngeal nerve branch of the vagus nerve, and it loops, right? It makes sense if it goes to gills, but it loops, and the right side, there's two sides. There's a left side and the right side. The right side is going to loop under the subclavian artery, subclavian artery. The left side loops under the aortic arch, but it's both in this sort of cardiovascular zone. And then it comes back up, and it's your larynx, right? You're making noises with your mouth. At least I am right now. Maybe your mic is muted and you're making noises with your mouth too, and you're using this nerve. So, but the recurrent laryngeal nerve, if generation after generation, necks are getting taller to get the higher and higher vegetation, it makes more sense just to stretch that nerve, stretch that nerve, stretch that nerve. Now it's 15 feet. This is outrageous. It should just go bloop. That's what it should do. And it should make that noise as it does a bloop. That's the noise it should make. That's the recurrent laryngeal nerve, but it's 15 feet as it does this. And we've known this for a long time. This isn't like some new, I mean, this is way pre-Darwin. I mean, this is Galen, right? This is like 150, AD 150. That's when we are when we're identifying these things. Galen used to take pigs. He did a lot of work on pigs, dissecting pigs, and he would take pigs into the public and cut them open, and they start squealing. Right, he's a horrible guy. They start squealing, and he cuts the laryngeal nerve, and then they stop squealing, right? Because they don't have nervous supply. Are they still screaming inside? Yeah, their insides are really screaming, but their mouth isn't. And so I mean that was Galen, and I mean, this stuff is like 19th century people are dissecting, 1800s people are dissecting. We're in like Wolfe and Davis days. People are dissecting giraffes and be like, whoa, look at this thing. This is outrageous. And so we've known this for a long time. So this concept of genetic adaptation, we've been dancing around that subject for a very long time. Darwin put it into very articulate, nearly poetic words, but it's a concept that has been on the tip of humanity's tongue for a very long time. So let's talk about the level of the species. Chickens, these things don't fly, right? What do they need marbled meat for? They're just gonna walk around and eat the other chicken shit and have like little pellets and then shit. And I don't know what they do. They make little noises and run from people. They don't fly. You don't see a lot of chickens that are flying. At least today, you don't. And so when you look at the chicken breast, what is that muscle supposed to do? Make it fly, right? The breast muscle right there, that thing you eat, and that's the flight muscle. It doesn't really use it. So it doesn't need a bunch of fat in there because it doesn't need to be aerobically fit. If it flaps its wings 50 times, and it's like, oh, I can't do a 51st. I am pooped. I am so fatigued. I can't keep going. It's not going to fall out of the air and die, right? But a duck flies. These ducks fly a lot. And so that's when you see the marbled meat. That's when you see this really type 1, this very red, fatty meat, all this easily accessible fat and very gridlock blood supply. And I mean, just that's what a duck is for. Now, you can put it into perspective of human beings who are very aerobically fit. It's better if your muscle looks like this. Oh, I do 50,000 crunches a day. Okay, it's ideal to have your abs look like duck breasts. I do 50,000 crunches a day. That's not helpful here. That's going to be painful if you're doing 50,000 crunches a day. I mean, you're very glycolytic. That doesn't feel good. Um, and so you see people who are really good marathon runners. They don't really look like sprinters. This is what you look like if you're a sprinter. If you're a really good marathon runner, this is ideal. Preferred energy substrates. Now this, you're not going to get this acute level. I look like this and suddenly I do 50,000 crunches a day and now my abs look like this. Where did they go? I'm just like this grease ball. That doesn't really happen at the acute level, not much. At the chronic level, though, at a adaptation of a species level, that's where you're going to see the differences. Chickens, we don't need to fly. We don't need a bunch of marbled meat. Ducks, we're flying. We need a bunch of marbled meat. But it's not just bones. It's not just ligaments. It's not just muscle. It's everything, every single tissue. Um, I mean, just whatever you're doing, any stress you apply to yourself, right? You're doing ice hockey, you're ballet, you're doing yoga, Bikram yoga, you're lifting, you're whatever you're doing, everything in you is adapting. Just slice your arm, take like a buzz saw, slice an arm in half, hot dog ways, and everything you see in there adapts according to the laws of specificity. Every organ is and energy system, right? There's a lot of mitochondria are playing into the energy systems, mitochondrial biogenesis. Let's get new mitochondria. Go for a run, and you're going to get a bunch of AMPK activation, right? You're going to go through ATP hydrolysis, start chopping phosphates off of your ATP, and then you're going to chop adenylyl kinase. Right? Let's remove one um, phosphate from an ADP onto another ADP, and now we have an AMP and an ATP, and we get a bunch of AMP built up, and AMP activated. This AMPK um, is this AMP activated protein kinase, this enzyme that will induce mitochondrial biogenesis, right? Also ruins your hypertrophy and induces atrophy and stuff, but tons of enzymes. It's not just AMPK. Um, it is all of your oxidative enzymes or all of your glycolytic enzymes. All of your enzymes start to change to better support the tasks that you are giving it. Transporter molecules, think GLUT4. That's one more thing the AMPK is going to do, is let's increase GLUT4, mobilization and content as well. But let's mobilize GLUT4 also to get more sugar into the cells. Receptor cells, this is an androgen receptor. So if you do a bunch of weightlifting, you're going to increase androgen receptor concentration, the density of androgen receptors. Genetic expression is going to change. Hypothalamic pituitary, whatever axes are going to respond and adapt. And so let's say it's hypothalamic pituitary liver axis if you want to get a bunch of IGF. Hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. All right, if you want, there's your testosterone, or hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. If you want tritothyronine and thyroxine, and so all these different glandular axes, every endocrine gland is going to adapt. I mean, every single one of them. Cartilage. People used to think of cartilage as dead tissue that doesn't do anything, and it's just there, and then it isn't, and even cartilage adapts. Cartilage adapts to better tolerate the specific characteristics of the stress involved. Now, the immune system is fascinating because in a time of quarantine, we are limiting our immune exposures, and we are not giving the exercise we needed. We're getting disuse atrophy in our immune system. Some of us, I mean, some people are out in the garden eating dirt and stuff. Some people are like this kid, wonderful. Eat food off the ground and stuff, good. But the immune system needs exposure. So this is a 2019 New York Times article. Not New York Times is not a scientific journal, but it's a cute one. It's nice. Should your children pick their noses? Should your children eat dirt? Maybe. Right, your body needs to know what immune challenges lurk in the immediate environment. Should you use antibacterial things? No. Are we taking way too many antibiotics? Yes. And it goes on to say, Dr. Lemon's prescription for a better immune response doesn't end there. You should not only pick your nose, you should eat it, she says. So, but this idea of we should expose ourselves, right? Otherwise, we get disuse atrophy in our immune system. Now, the characteristics, the immune system doesn't just respond exactly, otherwise it doesn't respond generally. You're not getting general adaptation in your immune system. Otherwise, why would we need COVID immunizations? Well, I got an immunization for mumps. Shouldn't that immunize me against everything? Rubella and measles and why am I not immunized against every possible thing? Why is COVID even a thing anymore? Well, because general adaptation syndrome is. I mean, so there are very precise responses based on the nature of what you present your body, both inside and outside, every possible stress. And you can see even like, well, I am a I'm not, but let's say hypothetically, the hypothetical I am a endurance athlete. Okay, well, your heart is going to look different based on what sport you do. Are you a swimmer? Are you a runner? Right, gravity presents itself differently. Right, preload is a little bit different. I mean, just your body position is different. The skeletal muscle pump works differently, and hearts remodel themselves. Like, oh, my heart is wonderful. I'm heart healthy because I eat my oatmeal and I do cardiovascular exercise. Okay, yeah, but one version of cardiovascular exercise is not another version of cardiovascular exercise. Lots of cardiac remodeling. You don't need to know the characteristics of cardiac remodeling, just the notion that our response is very precise. It is very specific to the nature of the stress, a fingerprint of the stress, the profile of loads and the timing signature and all of that. So skeletal muscle maybe one of the most adaptable tissues we have. I mean, there's arguments for, you could say, the immune system, even like the brain is very plastic, but our tissues are very adaptable, and muscle is a really adaptable one. But we have genetic ceilings, right? There are limits. The human form has limits, and just think, where do your arms go? Well, we do stuff in front of our body with ease and probably skill and talent and comfort, but like you do something behind your back, and good luck being all that dexterous, when you're doing it. You're not particularly coordinated. Your legs, do, I don't know, something like, try to write a term paper with your toes, holding a pencil. Like, there's no dexterity there. And so the idea here, though, is that our permissions, what our arms do, what our fingers do, how high we jump, what our feet are capable of, our permissions, our physical permissions follow our behaviors. They follow our needs, right? Whatever environment we're in, we tend to do a lot of things in front of our body where we're looking and where we're functioning. And so that's where our permissions, that's where they go. At the level of the individual, we have a use it or lose it principle, right? You stop using a tissue, all right, you don't need that tissue anymore. It's too metabolically expensive to maintain. See you later, right? That's the use it or lose it principle at the level of the individual. At the level of the species, if you don't require it, it never develops. At the level of the species, if there's no need, it doesn't develop in that species. So there may be a need to jump really high. There may be a need to isometrically contract for a really long time. So a bivalve mollusk, right? This is clams. This is oysters. This is mussels with s's, right? This is scallops, right? So this is down here is a scallop with those little blue teal things are its eyes. Not very effective eyes, but what is a selective pressure for a bivalve mollusk? Isometric contraction, right? Hold that thing close. Something's trying to pry it open. Okay, I'm just going to hold isometrically for as long as I can. If I can outlast you, you're going to get frustrated or fatigued or bored, and you're going to move on. A selective pressure for a bivalve mollusk is hold it as tightly as you can for as long as you can. That's not a selective pressure for human beings or many other creatures. So our genetic ceiling, our maximum capacity in isometric contraction is never going to match a mollusk, a bivalve mollusk. But let's compare it to a frog, right? The sartorius, a leg muscle, a really long leg muscle of a frog. So anytime you go to a bad buffet, you get these like rotten, clams and oysters and stuff, and you see these little things left on. Those are the adductor muscles, and so you see the adductor muscle right here, but the bisal or bisus retractor muscle, it's right by that. And if you compare that muscle to the sartorius of a frog, this little red guy down here. This is from page 78 of this book. Don't quote this value or anything, but just take the concept of this, where if the frog leg, that frog sartorius, were in a maximal isometric contraction for a second, 1/1000, you don't get anywhere beyond Mississippi. Um, as much ATP would be consumed as if that mollusk held the isometric contraction maximum for 46 minutes, right? Now, don't quote that value, right? Here's my source for it, but like is one person's reporting in one experiment, and I didn't see the data and how it was collected. But that's the idea of what is a frog? What is its selective pressures? I got to jump high to leap from my predators. I'm going to jump high and get away. With the mollusk, what is this? I got to pry myself shut. Selective pressures for survival, right? Self-preservation, and so it's an environment. And then what happens is the creature develops because of the environment, right? The creature develops because of the selective pressures. Over here, the creature develops because of the environment. The creature develops because of the selective pressures. Now, we can develop isometric holds, right, and buns. We can develop explosive, vertical jump height, and we can develop isometric contractions, but we're not going to be this good. We're not going to be this good. We have a genetic ceiling. We have a limit to our capacity. We can improve within that capacity. And if you think of something like skin color, okay, you could be on this end. You could be on this end. You could be very light, right? Hypopigmented. You could be very dark. You could be hyperpigmented. You could be, I don't know, Donald Trump in the middle here. That's the female equivalent of Donald Trump. And if you're like me over here, and I could tan. I'm going to move in this direction. I might be able to make it as far as Donald Trump. I could tan. I'm not going to get all the way, right? But if your starting point is here, tan, right, you're going to get darker. So there are different starting points. Some of us have a aerobic starting point that's very advanced. Some of us have an anaerobic or an explosive starting point that's very advanced. Some of us have different starting points in isometric capacity. Some of us have different starting points in vertical jump height. Go test 1,000 people on vertical jump. It's like, oh, none of us have trained, so we're all exactly 12 inches. That's not how it works. We have different starting points, right? And then we can make progress. We can make progress from our baseline, but we're going to have different baselines. And same thing with if you're going to do isometric holds, go do your bridges or something. You can get better at bridges, but you're not going to be a mollusk about it. You're not going to get that far. And the changes, the nature, the breadth of the changes and the depth of those changes you experience is going to be based on the breadth and depth of the challenges. Specificity of adaptation. If all you do in your workout is dumbbell bicep curls and lunges, guess what you get good at? Oh, my whole body. I'm working my upper body and my lower body, and I'm doing different weights. So yeah, you're only good at lunges and bicep curls, and like only with the dumbbells. So if you want to develop very broadly, expose yourself to broad stresses. Go swim and run up a hill and stretch a bunch and do pull-ups and play, do shuttle run, and you expose yourself to very diverse stresses. And then you can move in any direction, right? The absence of stress is a stress of a kind. So stress is everything. This class is stress physiology, but stress is just everything. Use of a tissue, that stresses it, right? Disuse, bed rest, that's a stressor. The withdrawal of gravity, that's a stressor. The nature of use, the precise characteristics, the fingerprint of use, that's a stressor. The environment, is it hot? Is it cold? Is the partial pressure of oxygen low? Is it early in the morning? Is it like all of these things are stressors? Stress is everything. And what we talk about in this class is the nature of stress, our response to stress. Now, stress, last few slides, stress sometimes people can use this a little bit inappropriately. And let's talk about Hans Selye. So Hans Selye was awarded $50,000 a year for 3 years in the US, and another $50,000 a year by the Canadian tobacco industry. And so Philip Morris Tobacco, right? So to talk about, to promote smoking, as for the stress of it all, like, okay, general adaptation syndrome, and if you're smoking, and so when Hans Selye, I'll requote some of this later because the article requotes it later, but to smoke or not to smoke, that's not the question, right? But to smoke or drink or eat or drive a car or simply fret, since we cannot discard our surplus energy, this is Selye talking, we must occupy it somehow. Often more damage is done by creating, through well-meant crusades of enlightenment, innumerable hypochondriacs whose main sickness is really the fear of sickness. So what Hans Selye is saying, for a lot of money, is smoke away your stresses, and these stresses will depart and will leave you feeling fulfilled and less burdened, and you'll be healthier and happier in life. Hans Selye promoting, quote, big tobacco. um, he appears on the Canadian broadcasting corporate. So this is US and Canada, and he's talking about just let's promote this stuff. He's a consultant, and he's willing to write for us and wants to provide us some guidelines. Dr. Selye should comment on the unlikelihood of there being a mechanism by which smoking could cause cardiovascular disease. Dr. Selye can point out that even if cigarette smoking had some carcinogenic effect, it might actually, or it might account for only a markedly small number of deaths, the balance being the result of other influences. And so smoking, using stress inappropriately. Oh, I'm smoking to get rid of stress. No, smoking is the stressor. That's the stressor. Like, what are you doing to eliminate stress? Oh, I don't know. There's a behavior that I'm going to try to be sensitive to here that is going to come off really insensitive because I'm like a guy who doesn't quite get it. But cutting, we all know cutting and people who do this, and I once knew somebody who, like, man, she was a mess with her wrist. Just that thing will never heal. And I didn't know what to say because I don't understand it. I'm not a psychologist. But that. Let's just pretend it's like, oh, I'm sort of getting rid of stresses, or something. Like, wow, that's a huge stress, though. Like, I mean, so smoking, or, oh, I do meth to get rid of my stress. That's the stressor. And so sometimes people use stress inappropriately. In this case, for a lot of dollars. Again, just more from this article talking about Selye and the inappropriate use of stress. But the take-home message for today, that everything in your body is constantly changing. Everything in your body is under stress. Everything in your body is noticing the environment, even if you're taking no notice of it. Even if you're just oblivious to your environment, every cell in your body is paying attention, sort of despite you, or without consideration of your consideration. But we adapt according to the laws of specificity. Everything is a very specific response, and the summation of those responses, the summation of those stresses placed on our form. I talked about this earlier. We are subjected to countless stressors every single day. Our body responds very specifically to those stressors, and it shapes our thinking, it shapes our physique, it shapes our immune system, it shapes everything, right? We take on the physical embodiment of the stressors we encounter. So that is our autobiography. And if you want a good autobiography, if you want to look in the mirror and look at your lipid panels and your blood work and whatever, and see a really healthy autobiography, expose yourself to the right stresses. Right. So kind of major summarizing point one, you need stress, and there's eustress and distress, and picking the right ones. But remember, um, every single stress, so specific, right? You're giving birth now and it's just your blood everywhere, right? This was me once. It was really cold outside, and my friend Wynn and I were stranded on the roof of Bond Fitness Center. This is 2009. And we were stuck on the roof of Bond Fitness Center, and I thought it would be cold, and we weren't dressed appropriately, and like it's really windy up there. If you like try to spend a night on the roof of Bond, you have Nintendo thumb, right? You're just like a sad person in general. Whatever, you're attacked by hornets. This was Nathaniel's Tom Daddy certified professional. You hire a dominatrix. So Nathaniel didn't actually. This is an inside joke, sort of an outside joke now. But any of these things are totally different. Every single one of these stressors is totally different. What would Selye say if like zombies could talk? He would say, oh, you're going to respond. It's just different amounts of stressors, and they stress you differently. Just have a cigarette and calm your ass down. That's what Selye would say. What would Adolf say? Maybe Edward Adolf, right? Not like Adolf Hitler, but Edward Adolf. He would say, okay, this is very different from this, 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 is very different from that. That's what he would say. And you know, your adaptations might overlap a little bit. I don't know what other would be, but your adaptations might overlap a little bit, but they're going to be very unique. So we have stresses everywhere. Stress is necessary. So stress is like everything and everywhere all the time. Right now, you're stressed by tons of things, and allostatic load is the summation of stressors. Stress is everywhere, all the time. You need it, right? You need it, and your body is responding very specifically to that stress, but you need a good dose of that stress, right? You need to be in that Goldilocks zone of stress. And that's it for today. Except for questions. What questions do we have?
So how does this, I guess the last slide, if you could pull it up.
Yeah, the sort of bell curve one.
I think it was, let me see. Because I'm just trying to figure out how this relates to like the fight or flight. And it came to my mind when you were just talking. I think it was the last slide or the slide before that. Not the one that says good stress or bad stress. I think it was the one before that. Yeah. So when you were here, wait.
More?
Go forward. No, forward.
Okay.
This one.
Okay.
So like, where does like fight or flight come into this? Because like you experience the stress, and then go ahead.
Okay, so I promise we're going to do the actual sort of endocrinology of fight or flight. We'll do a detailed version of the sympathoadrenal medullary system and the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and so we will look at exactly what's happening hormonally in response to a stressor, but so it's actually a really good question. If we think about the nature of different stress, let's say your stress is overtraining, you can get adrenal insufficiency, where your fight or flight response is suppressed. Right, adrenal insufficiency is not like, you know, your heart's racing and you know you have this overactive adrenal gland. That's not, you know. So depending on the nature of the stress, it can be different. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, like probably horribly. So I'm gonna stop the share so we can see. So if I'm looking at your face and you're just like bored, or I'm looking at your face and you're like or whatever, then I'll have some understanding of some cues. So will you ask the question again, from just so I can to guide how I address it?
No, I think I'm jumping the gun because you said we're going to go over that later.
Okay,
so I'm
yeah.
just trying to correlate those two, but I'm jumping the gun. So it's okay.
So we will go over all of that. We'll talk about it, just the nature of what's going on, and you know, the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the adrenal gland, and so the endocrinology there, and then we'll go into what happens during overtraining and how does this get disrupted, and so we'll go through all of those things sort of soon.
I have a question. So for like basal metabolic rate, generally it's pretty like predetermined and genetic, right? Um,
I mean, yeah, everyone has a starting point. Yeah, I
right,
mean,
right.
everyone's a different height and everyone has a different basal metabolic rate, and how much muscle mass are you hanging on to? And so there is a huge genetic component.
And then okay, so with that, if right, and then like your personal life, all the stresses you put on it, right, influences that, of course. So then, I guess my question is like, um, with that, then does that, so for example, like my parents and their lifestyle, right? Does what they did influences my basal my I guess my starting point of basal metabolic
No. So I think it was Galton, Francis Galton, who did this experiment where takes a bunch of rats, mice or rats or whatever, a little quadruped with a tail, and just chopping their tails off and saying, the idea is the blacksmith's forearm, right? And let's say this is like Middle Earth or Westeros or some sort of like medieval Europe or something, and like the blacksmith has a child, has a son, and that son has a big forearm and whatever, and that son has a big forearm. It must have been the behavior of the blacksmith, this life of hammering to get this big forearm, that passed on those traits to their offspring. And it doesn't really work like that. Now there are epigenetic explanations of the genes don't change, the genes don't change, but there are particular, if you go through a period, there's some interesting data on, you go through a period of starvation very young, and then your offspring actually might live longer. So there's some interesting stuff, but I'm pretty sure it was Galton was just cutting off like tails of mice and reproducing them, and they'd all have the exact same length of tail. So I mean, there's we could say this in a cruder way of circumcision doesn't get passed on to the offspring. Like, you still have to circumcise. Like, I mean, it's not like, well, okay, we've been circumcising for so long, we don't have to do it anymore. And so it doesn't really get passed on. Traits and behaviors don't really get passed on. There are some nutritional ones that can get passed on a little bit, and that's epigenetic, where you are altering the expression of genes a tiny bit, but it shouldn't really. The amount that your basal metabolic rate is influenced by your parents' behavior in life, it's going to be very minimal, and what's going to be maximal is just your parents' genomes. Those two genomes come together and make some executive decisions, and now you have a basal metabolic rate. But there's a little bit of room for epigenetics in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Anyone
Well,
else?
I feel like, okay, based on what you just said, what about like if your parents tend to like have like anxiety or like worry, like overly worry about stuff, and then I feel like sometimes that affects the child
It
and they
does. Now,
have those same tendencies. That's learned behavior.
yeah, it is. That is a really good one. So now, when you are in utero, we're talking sort of different things. So like if you are a little baby in the womb and your parents, and your mom is, it doesn't matter what your dad's doing. At that point, your dad's sort of out of the biological picture. You're already in your mom, right? Let's say you're in her stomach. You're like swimming in her stomach acid. That would be weird. So you're in your womb, and uh, your dad's behavior doesn't matter anymore. Your mom's behavior here really matters. The types of food she's eating, the volumes of food she's eating. If your mom drinks a ton of alcohol during pregnancy, that matters. So there's a lot of things your mom can do at this point when you're, in the womb, that's going to matter. Anxiety is one of them. And I know there's a lot of studies on, again, going back to like rats and mice and stuff. There's a lot of studies, just like really stress them out, just have them just be on edge all the time, and emotional stress, and you're going to get some panicky offspring, and so the behaviors that your mother takes on during pregnancy definitely affects the offspring. Now, like, well, I'd never worked out before, and then I started doing exercise. Like, that's fine. That's not gonna, like, you're not gonna hurt the baby. You'll pass out before, the mother's body is gonna protect the fetus before it protects itself. It's like, oh, the baby's gonna be denied blood. No, you'll be denied blood. Um, and so the baby is just gonna siphon everything just fine. Now there could be, I wouldn't go boxing. I wouldn't like get punched in the stomach a lot, and I wouldn't go do Bikram yoga where the temperature gets super high, but pretty much everything else, the baby's totally fine in exercise. But like stuff like you're really emotionally stressed out, or there's nutritional deprivation or surplus, or there's alcohol or something like that, can have an effect. Babies have their own little hemoglobins that will siphon oxygen really effectively. So there's really no risk of, ooh, the baby's getting low on oxygen. It's probably blue in there. Like that's not going to happen if somebody's exercising really hard and stuff. But so there are behaviors that can affect the fetus though.
When does it shift from that type of hemoglobin to the generic kind, I guess?
Say that again.
When does it shift from that fetus hemoglobin to like child hemoglobin?
I don't know. It's after birth. Yeah. There's like the gamma globulin, I think, and the alphas and betas, or like for all of us, we have like, I think it's alphas and betas, and the babies have little gammas, and so the affinity for oxygen is just way higher in this parasite, and really knows how to like out of the gas tank. And I'm not sure. I think it's probably just like right after birth, but I'm not really sure when it transitions. What else? Anyone else have any? How's everyone doing with like the semester and the? Okay. All right, good. Nathaniel speaks for the group. All right, the spokesperson. All right.
I wanted to ask with you're talking about how things like such as muscle hypertrophy, like it's got a metabolic cost, so why make it too much or something. With things that are like somewhat redundant in the body, like an appendix or a tailbone, or how they got the muscles like prick the hair up on your skin, things like that. Is that just not phased out of humans because there's no selective pressure for it, or is there?
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that's going to linger. I mean, there will be a time, I think, where,
because like there's still energy to grow those things.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point. And that sort of use it or lose it, principle. It takes a really long time for something to be with like the life cycle of a human. I mean, you can introduce pesticides to fruit flies or something like that and start seeing, some genetic adaptation in a relatively short time because the life cycle is so short. Humans, there's a lot of generations you're going to have to go through before anything like that starts changing. It's a really, really good point. And I would think what we would see, I'm not an expert here, but I think what we would see is just dormant genes. I mean, you have in your genome, you have the genes to grow a tail, but nobody here has a tail to my knowledge. So, but you're not like expressing those proteins, they're not active. And so my hunch is we're going to end up seeing some non-protein coding genes. Even let's go back to the recurrent laryngeal nerve. I mean, this is ludicrous, this thing. I mean, people, it's weird too. Like, it just goes up to like your larynx. You talk with this thing, and the pig squeals with it, and in maybe one out of every, I don't know, 150 people, one out of every 200 people, you can look up the number. It's like not a recurrent laryngeal nerve. They have like this sort of normal thing, but they end up with all these other defects, and they end up being like heart defects and stuff. So I haven't read much of the literature there, but there is a percentage of people who don't have this sort of looping laryngeal nerve. And so I think genes just need an awful lot of time to reprogram themselves, or just sort of silence themselves. Really good question. I wish I had a really good answer. The question was much better. The question was better than my response, but
thank you.
Are we all out of questions? Couple more days with specificity of adaptation and the nature of stress and everything, and then we'll get into some of the more specific things. I just like to, whenever, I talk about this subject a lot, so students who've had me multiple times have heard me sort of overdoing stress and our response to stress, but then we're going to take the class in some different directions and get into the specifics that I think people are probably eager to take those off ramps already. But a couple more days on the topic of stress and our response to it, and then we'll get much more precise and physiological from there. Okay, should we get out of here? Liam, what time is it where you are?
9:30 in the morning.
Oh, that's not bad. Okay.
Yeah, I've been up for 5 hours, but I had a class before.
Okay. All right. All right. Well,
I get up before even the birds start singing. So
I hope you can make the most of your weird schedule.
it's all right. I'm worried about when you guys go into daylight savings and I'm properly staffed, because that'll be 4 a.m. class. Yeah.
I'll talk about daylight savings at some point, and of when you change all of the clocks. I mean, just the number of heart attacks that are experienced in the U.S. Patient outcomes are horrible. Nathaniel, we should do an analysis on the medical databases of spring forward and fall back, or when whatever those the nomenclature is, and kind of look at outcomes on the 2 different days of whether we lose sleep or gain sleep. And patient outcomes are horrible when you lose an hour. I mean, just the admitted patients are taken out the wrong door at the end. I mean, it's horrible for everybody. I have no idea when we do this. There's some countries just don't honor it. I think some states don't honor it. But do you have daylight savings in Australia?
No, not in this state where I am,
Okay.
but the state further south we do.
Okay. What a stupid idea, daylight savings, of changing the times. I mean, it's just people die every time you do it. For the lost time, they die. All right. We'll get there in the sleep deprivation section, though. So I will see everybody in a couple days.
Thank you.
Thanks.